We've got Vinayak Chatterjee also joining us, Feedback Infra. Lots to discuss. Deepan planning, those mega privatization plans. So what's in store? Vinayak, good morning. Let's talk about how important privatization, the plan is for the infrastructure space as well. Talk to us about that. Considering that some existing PSUs in cap goods, power, other infra, we're already seeing quite a strong presence there. Do you think they can be better managed and attract capital once the privatization agenda gets going?
Thank you. That's a serious question. I'll answer your question on two broad planes. Plane number one is on the strategic front, the divestment of non-core, non-strategic PSUs is very much desirable. I mean, it fits in with the overall theme of the present government and the Prime Minister, which says less government, more governance. The divestment of PSUs has been a long-standing, shall we say, point for action on the economic agenda. If you had asked me this question in January or even February, I would have given you a resounding yes, that it's a great move, let's get on with it. But I have to admit that in the current context, the decision has to be seen in the context of the COVID pandemic. What we are seeing today is a highly stressed economy, stressed on both consumer demand and on investment, both of which are drivers of the economy. Consumer demand is not germane to this discussion right now. Let us focus on investment demand. In a situation where across the board, private sector is virtually on a freeze on fresh investments, including more so in infrastructure. It is now incumbent on the government to announce massive, what I call infra projects and public works programs to get the economy up and running once again. So we are talking about the only lever that is available to pull is public expenditure. And how does public expenditure get channelized? It gets channelized through PSUs. So is this the time to privatize PSUs? My answer is no. Not just from a capital markets point of view, that whether there is investor appetite or no investor appetite. I am not touching that area. That's better left to capital market experts. But from a public policy point of view, these PSUs in infra and public works specifically and in capital goods are required as instrumentalities of the state to channelize resources and move into public expenditure and public works program. So in contextually, this is not the right time. I would certainly feel that this should be postponed by about 3 years. And I understand the creative tension. Here is the need of the government to raise resources. And here is the need to galvanize public investments. In my view, the need to galvanize public investments has far higher impact, far higher multiples for the economy than the amount of revenue that will be garnered by divesting these PSUs. But let me rest here.
Okay, so saying not the right time, but if we do see some amount of privatization come through, are there any advantages, possibly better efficiencies as well? I mean, key infra subsectors have seen some of this take place as well over the last 2 decades, or at least private market share increase when it comes to segments like airports, roads, power, for example. What's the kind of roadmap you see, Vinayak? I mean, and according to you, what would be perhaps a better opportunity to do this if you're saying that right now is really not the time?
Please note that you're talking about greenfield projects, where new projects have to be built. In the privatization of PSUs, we are not talking about building greenfield projects. We are talking about a change of ownership. So first, it doesn't satisfy the turbocharging requirement of the economy. Secondly, you are making an assumption that private sector coming in will necessarily lead to increases in efficiencies. Now, let me point out that many of these PSUs are not grossly inefficient. Some of them are pretty efficient in their own way. So, to my mind, the context of privatization, and I don't want to repeat the point I made earlier, on most counts, the current context does not justify any hurry in moving ahead with the PSU privatization.
Sure. Vinayak, not even for railways, because they appear to have done the groundwork for private participation. Do you think this perhaps could be one segment which could be a front runner in the queue whenever the privatization process does kickstart?
I agree with you there. See, there are two major privatization issues pending in the railways. One is the PPP of station development. The other is this 150 private trains that are to be run by private operators. Now, in the private trains, please remember that no tracks are being privatized. Even the engines and coaches are going to be owned by Indian Railways. It is only the provision of service, ticketing, hygiene, sanitation, catering, and other comforts of travel, which will be taken care of by a private sector provider. So running 150 private trains is a very good step because it sends a certain signal to the market about a forward-looking institution. So I'm fully for that. And so far as station redevelopment is concerned, it is already a PSU. There is a Station Development Corporation. It has a specific name, which is trying to get private capital to develop a whole bunch of new stations. So both these activities, to my mind, are not really germane to the discussion on privatizing PSUs.
Sure. What about the recently announced FDI in defense, which is now opened up to 74%? Do you think this could be a game changer?
We've been talking about defense for many, many years now. I do know that a lot of my business friends in various sectors who have jumped into the defense production arena appear to be disappointed for lack of orders. But that's really not your question. The question really is that FDI in defense is welcome because it will lead to setting up facilities in India. We do, as a country, we do require tapping into modern technologies, and that doesn't come easy because they're all proprietary technologies. So if a large shareholding is given to foreign companies that have proprietary technologies, and they are then motivated to invest in India in an Atmanirbhar kind of sense, I think it's a very good step.
Vinayak, some of the PSUs have genuine capacities, whether it is BEL or BHEL, BEML, they have capacities. They have capacities which are enviable. They have they have got both labor and a huge advantage in terms of location. Do you think if not privatization, some out-of-box thinking in terms of subleasing those capacities, renting those capacities, I mean, that should be done and that can be done. Do you think one should start thinking on those lines? Because either we talk about privatization or no privatization. There is just no middle path. Ya to bech do ya rakh lo.
No. I think the issue is not about subleasing capacities. The real issue is about demand creation. What will you do with capacity if there is no demand? So you spoke about out-of-the-box thinking, and in the last 2 months particularly, I have actually written a series of articles in Business Standard as well as in interactions with the media. I have strongly advocated that the nation not restrict itself to policy discussions which are constrained by the traditional in-box thinking of the Consolidated Fund of India, but set up an out-of-the-box vehicle called the National Renewal Fund, of which I have suggested a 30 lakh crore capitalization. There's lots of details and I don't want to bore you because a lot of eminent economists, public policy makers have come forward not only to endorse the scheme, but to suggest how it could be implemented. So in short, in summary, the important issue is demand creation, and demand creation can only be done with a sledgehammer approach on fiscal spends on large public works programs, for which a national renewal fund is required, which is a substitute for the Consolidated Fund of India and should have a 50-year horizon with a 30 lakh crore capitalization. That will create real demand, and that is the sledgehammer approach that is required in the times that we're living in. Everything else is a second and third derivative. Is that then how do I meet that demand? I can sublease capacities, I can set up new capacities, but everywhere there is capacity existing today. So why talk about PSUs? There's capacity existing right through the economic spectrum, whether it is private sector or public sector. So the real issue is what is the out-of-the-box thinking that will lead to revival of demand. Everything else is a second and third derivative. And my short answer is we have to now, the time has come to think outside the box, the same phrase you mentioned. And I am a strong advocate of a 30 lakh crore, which is roughly 14% of GDP, a 50-year long-term fund called the National Renewal Fund. But let me stop here.
All right, Vinayak. Appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us. Stay safe and certainly hope to see much more
Thank
of you
you.
going forward.